In his Victory Monday press conference today, head coach Kevin O'Connell announced Josh Dobbs will be the starting quarterback going into next week at US Bank Stadium against the New Orleans Saints. And honestly, after the way that he performed and led us on that game-winning drive, I do think Josh Dobbs deserves it. I mean, obviously, he is awarded a little bit of extra time due to Jiren Hall's concussion. I'm sure they're going to want to be overly cautious with him. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll kind of talk about when we think he could be cleared and what the future kind of looks like at the position. But to be honest, I don't see any problem with Josh Dobbs being named the starter right now. I mean, obviously, yesterday came in after the Jiren Hall concussion. Looked a little bit shaky. Obviously, I mean, he'd been here for 5 days, still learning the
Right.
playbook. It sounds like Kevin O'Connell was basically giving him the plays, stay in the huddle. And then once he said it in the huddle and broke the huddle, Kevin O'Connell was pointing out which player was going to be doing what, just to really simplify it for him. And we all know he's a smart guy. We all
Right.
know the whole
He's
rocket science background,
the
the aerospace
was
engineer,
a pastronaut
the
is what they're
pastronaut.
calling him.
Yep.
The
Coined by
pastronaut.
NASA,
Yeah.
the pastronaut. I love it.
Yep. Yep.
Good for
Yep.
Josh Dobbs getting some of the recognition, because I thought he it sounds like he played pretty well in Arizona. Obviously, that Arizona team was pretty weak. But yeah, I mean, he settled in the second half, led us on a game-winning drive, and the rest is history. 31-28 win over the Atlanta Falcons, and he's going to get his shot next week. How you feeling about Josh Dobbs?
So Josh Dobbs, obviously, again, I mean, what he did was amazing. 5 days, coming in and performing the way he did, especially at down the stretch of this game. Like you said, when he came in, things were definitely looking shaky. And I mean, I guess that brings me into the idea of who should start between Josh Dobbs and Jiren Hall, because again, I did see what I like to see in Josh Dobbs, and for him to end up winning the game he did, it does make a lot of sense for the Vikings to move forward with him as your starting quarterback. Though I would say that Jiren Hall, the thing is I mean, when you look at this, is like, what do you want from this season? Obviously, the Vikings are still, I mean, on a 4-game win streak, they still want to win games and still make that playoff push, because we are seeing the team that we thought we were going to have going into this season. And it's obviously showing that it might not matter as much as who the quarterback is at the end of the day here. But Jiren Hall came in and played super fantastic here. And I know you have the stats here if you want to bring those up real quick. So Joshua Dobbs, so we'll start with Jiren Hall. I mean, the first drive, kind of 3-0, he was backed up against the end zone or whatever, which is a tough situation. But then the second drive is 5 for 6, 78 yards, goes all the way down. Unfortunately, we didn't get the touchdown, but you saw a lot of good things out of Jiren Hall. And, you know, a lot of the excitement a lot of us Viking fans had coming into this game, we were able to see in that one drive. Ultimately didn't end in a touchdown, as he did put his body on the line and took, ended up not being the best decision for him, and paid for it. But we did see a lot of good out of him, and it just begs the question, like, moving forward, what as a Vikings fans, you kind of wonder, like, do we already know what Joshua Dobbs is? He's been in the league for six seasons. And before moving on, actually, I should probably say Joshua Dobbs' stats: with 20 attempts for 30 attempts, 158 yards, two touchdowns, 0 interceptions, had 7 carries for 66 yards on the ground with 1 touchdown. And then, like you said, he had 2 fumbles, a safety. And also, I do want to bring up the fact that there was also a muffed snap that he dropped as well, that he jumped on right away. But moving back to him again, is you got a journeyman type of quarterback, and if you're looking towards our future, unless you're like, we got to just put the best player out there, I'm not convinced that Joshua Dobbs absolutely is the best player going forward here. Though, I mean, you can definitely say, like, obviously after a win like that, how do you not play him? I mean, if you win a game like that, you deserve to get another shot. I do believe in that, though. I don't think it's that easy, because Jiren Hall came in and looked really good in that one drive, but he didn't have the mistakes that you did see of Joshua Dobbs. And you are getting a guy that's his six years. So it's like, if you play Joshua Dobbs throughout the season, unless maybe he does play super, like, fantastic, whatever, you do wonder, like, or do you want to know what you have in a guy like Jiren Hall, who looked good in his one drive, but now if you don't play him, you don't know for sure what you have in him, and it could make things confusing going forward. But that's also not to say, this is why it's so confusing, and I'm going to be bouncing back and forth here, is because with Josh Dobbs, you do have a guy who has all the talent. After that game, because we were on Bleacher Report, and I did say, like, I think you still move with Jiren Hall forward, and I kind of came back with that comment because I do think what Josh Dobbs ended up doing was very impressive at the end there. And obviously for someone like me who's been asking for a mobile quarterback and stuff, I mean, he's absolutely that. But again, I mean, but I did really like to see what Jiren Hall, and I am sitting on that question of like, well, I would like to see what we have in him. Is it too late to see what Josh Dobbs actually does have in his career going forward? And it's just that kind of interesting thing, because again, you look at it, how many players do you see who have six years in the NFL and then end up breaking out, and not just breaking out, like, because then there's guys like Case Keenum, obviously, who I wouldn't really call him a journeyman at the time. He became one for sure, but he was a guy who kind of broke out for at least that one season with us. But then after that, kind of never really did anything. Right. The only player that really comes to my mind in recent memory is Kurt Warner, who was a journeyman to come up and actually be a top end quarterback in the NFL. Where on the other side with Jiren Hall, you have, the Brock Purdy from last year, you have the Russell Wilsons, you have the Dak Prescotts, you obviously have the Tom Brady, and they're Colin Kaepernick for Kirk Cousins. Yeah, I probably should mention him. It's honestly, the odds seemed, obviously this is, anything can happen in the world, in the NFL. There's always a new trail to be what's that? What was that quote? New trail to be burned, I guess. Is that what it is? But something new trail to be created. Whatever you want to say, you know what I'm saying.
Path to be forged.
New path to be forged. Let's go with that. And it could be. And honestly, if this would be a new one if Josh Dobbs ended up coming in, because going back to what I was saying earlier, I did go back into his highlights. And from what he did in the Cardinals, I looked honestly deep into everything of how his career kind of went up leading to this point. And, he played with the Steelers. He never really got a shot. I think at the end of the first year, he had like a couple plays or whatever. I think he got to kneel the ball for -1 yard, whatever. I think after that season, they traded him to the Jaguars for like a 5th round pick. And then the Jaguars, I don't think, ended up taking him. He ends up getting picked back by Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh goes with Mason Rudolph. So pretty much at the end of the story, he never really gets a chance, and he's never really gets to play until the Titans. He goes for the Browns for a little bit, whatever. The Titans decide to bring him onto the squad. Malik Willis isn't working out, and he finally gets his really first chance at being a starting quarterback. So you are also talking about a guy that there is that potential for him who never got a shot, where maybe he is growing throughout. I mean, he had a couple good games with the Titans, ended up having two touchdowns, 2 interceptions, ended up losing. He did get a strip sack, I think, to lose against the Jaguars for them to go into playoffs. This year with Arizona, in 8 games starting, he was 1 for 7, which Arizona is a terrible team. So, I mean, you can definitely argue it wasn't his fault there, but he ended up having about 1,500 yards throwing, 8 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And I think he had 4 rushing touchdowns on the ground. But his highlights look fantastic. I mean, you are looking at a guy who can absolutely do everything you want from a quarterback position. I mean, he can, and we've seen it all in display in that one game. He can avoid pressure. He can extend plays with his legs. He can also extend plays with his legs and ultimately throwing the ball down the field and keep his eyes on the field, all that stuff. And he has a rocket of an arm. The one big thing I am concerned about him is his knack for turnovers. And this isn't, obviously we can argue that he was only on this team for 5 games. We can argue that, but he still had he still had 2 fumbles. He still had the botched snap. And like I said, he had 5 interceptions, 8 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, which isn't terrible, but he did have 5 interceptions for Arizona. So that's something that you do have to pay attention to. And it is the thing is like, can he come and also have a chance to be our future? And that's the argument against Jiren Hall, is we don't know what we have from Hall yet, but we did see a really good drive from him that didn't have much mistakes at all. So that's the hard part. What do you do going forward? Like, do you really want to make this playoff push? Absolutely. I think you do at this point in this Viking season. But I mean, ultimately, if that doesn't fit, if that all fails, are we sure that Jaren Hall couldn't have been that guy as well? And at the same time, you get to see what you have in Jaren Hall. So I think all of that up in there. I know I talked a while here. I want to get into both sides as much as I could, but I'll let you take it from here. What do you think on all that stuff, and your opinion on Jaren Hall versus Josh Dobbs, and who we should go with moving forward? Obviously, Josh Dobbs now, but you have to wonder, like, what do we have in Jaren Hall?
Right, and that is the other side of the argument. That was an interesting one after our conversation yesterday as well. It's like, yeah, Josh Dobbs is playing well, and you could put him out there, and he could play really well the rest of the season. But at the end of the day, like Case Keenum that year, you do know, like, you have a good idea of what he is. And like you said, Jaren Hall really is kind of a blank canvas right now. Like, everyone was kind of impressed with what he did in college. He had some big seasons there. Comes in this year. Obviously, like we talked about that drive yesterday, looked really good. For the future, he knows just go corner end zone, go towards the pylon. Worst case scenario, you go out of bounds at the 1 yard line. You don't get hurt. You get to go again. And it's funny in that scenario, if he doesn't overthrow TJ Hawkinson, we're not talking about any of this. And he probably keeps playing. We probably still win the game anyway. But so that is the interesting part of the argument. But at the same time, this team does need to win. And it just doesn't look great. Like, you make the trade for Dobbs. Dobbs comes in. He leads you to that victory. He does some really good things. After people gave him shit for all the mistakes he made early on, after he had settled in from being on this team for 5 days, he made some really good decisions. Sure, he passed up some throws with his runs, but at the end of the day, it's like, if you're still learning an offense, you do what you do what you can do to gain yards and score points. And he did that. Like, this offense scored 28 points because of him. Jaren Hall's obviously had the drive that led to the 3-pointer, the field goal. But so I get that side of the argument, but it just doesn't look good to take Dobbs off the field, especially after this. And I do think they are. You don't want to say lucky because of the concussion, but you are getting a little bit lucky here to where you get to ride the hot hand of Josh Dobbs, who played well enough, and we won the game yesterday. Probably, I would guess probably mid to end of week, they'll announce, hey, Jaren Hall's back. He's cleared concussion protocol. He's going to be back up in an emergency situation only if we need him. And this will be like their excuse to he can still be there. And in case there's an injury, Jaren Hall can still play. But this is the big, all right, Josh Dobbs, what are you going to do? Show us what you can do in this game after a full week and a half learning the offense, do what you did last week, getting to know the players here. Maybe JJ comes back. I don't think he'll be back this week, but he can. It'll be interesting if he does get inserted to this offense. But basically, I do think this is his opportunity. Is like, go show us what you can do. But I do think the leash might be relatively short. Where Jaren Hall's been here for a while. Again, there is that thing. You don't know what you have in Jaren Hall, and he showed some impressive things yesterday. So I do think it'll be one of the scenarios where this may be one of those. All right, Josh, go out, win us this game, and play really, really well, and the job's yours going forward. But if he comes out and he looks, like he did yesterday, where he does have a few mistakes that are kind of like, what are you doing? You're a 6-year vet. Then I do think maybe, and win or lose. If they win the game, it'll be even more of a question. If they lose, I think they definitely go back to Jaren Hall, especially you do have a little bit of an elongated week with the Sunday night game coming up after that. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. But I do think it is the right move to go with Josh Dobbs as of now. Won the game for you. You still have the concussion thing with Jaren Hall. So it's definitely 100% the right move. But for how long, that does remain to be seen. And I think we'll have a lot more clarity at about 3:30 next Sunday, I think.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I mean, all things considering, with Kirk going down, and we are in a pretty positive situation where we feel good about both these guys, or at least like they're both still have question marks on them, but we still feel good, a lot better about our situation. We're like picking between, they both looked good. We're arguing about who we should start because we like them both, not the opposite where they both sucked, which we have dealt with a lot in our past when one of our quarterbacks go down or whatever, pretty much everything up until Kirk Cousins. And I do want to say is that's like the one interesting thing. And I remember the thing I was trying to say is blaze a new trail is what I was trying to say earlier. Blaze a new trail. And that's exactly what it would be with Josh Dobbs. And like I said, like that's why they made a movie of Kurt Warner, because you don't see stuff like that where a journeyman quarterback who never really gets his shot, finally does. And then he never lets it go. And I mean, it's possible. It's definitely possible. And I think with this kid, he definitely could, because it is like when I would say, like, if you go back and I just watched his highlights from what he did in Cardinals. I wasn't watching his tape or whatever, but when you watch it, it is extremely impressive. I mean, his ability, and we saw it firsthand, his ability to avoid pressure and extend plays of his legs is explode. Like it looks pretty elite, and we saw that. We did see that yesterday. It wasn't like he is a legit great at avoiding pressure and getting down the field, and he has a rocket of an arm. I do think that's the one question that moving forward, and like you said, a very short leash, because I think if he does really bad and he has a lot of turnovers, like they will bring Jiren Hall back in the following week or whatever. Obviously, we hope whoever's our starter, we want one of these guys to be the guy. I mean, it'd be great if Josh Dobbs ends up having a resurrection of his career. But it is going to be him making mistakes and throwing intercepted passes. There was a couple even passes that were a little bit off yesterday as well that could have maybe been picked off. So those are things we're going to have to look forward. And man, it does feel like if he's able to figure that part of his games, like the ceiling, there's no ceiling on this kid because, and he's obviously really smart, but for him to show what he's done with the Titans, with Cardinals, with us now in short amount of time, is really impressive by itself. But the physical talent, I didn't realize how physically gifted he was this whole time until we were able to really see him in person, just because he is kind of the journey guy. Like nobody's really paying attention to him. And it would be a hell of a story if, he has this Case Keenum. I mean, obviously, hopefully, it's further than that. But if he has this Case Keenum type of breakout season, and I mean, it would be impressive. So I'm excited. And I do think ultimately you're right that, I mean, you can't have a comeback like that. Even if the first half did have some ugly plays, with the 5 days, all that stuff, it does make sense. But for him to step up the way he did, you have to give him the spot. And like you said, ultimately short leash, Jiren Hall will come in if that doesn't happen. And, we can feel good about that as well. But right now, I think it's Josh Dobbs earned his right to this is going to be his chance. If someone's going to turn around their career right now, this is it for him with a good offense. And it's not the Cardinals. Like he's in a great spot to really become the player he's obviously been working really hard to become. So
absolutely.
Yeah. It'll be interesting.
We'll see. But anyway, the Pastronaut named starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings against the Saints, but the Stormin' Mormon's right behind him. Let us know which one you would like to see at the helm in the comment section below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys next time right here on the GG Sports Podcast.
Skol Vikes.